I want you to take a look around the room here a little bit. You know each other here pretty well, for the most part. Now, of all the people in this room, who do you think, from your perspective, is the very best listener? You give it some thought. Here they are, all scattered around. You can kind of refresh your memory a little bit. Who's the best listener of this whole group? Now, that question is not as easy as it sounds. It's a little bit difficult because when you start evaluating, well, now, wait a minute, what do I really consider to be a good listener? What makes a good listener? And then it's really further complicated by the fact that not very many of us are very good listeners. And you may have a hard time finding anybody that you want to put at the top of the list. You may find a few people you think are pretty good, and, well, I think maybe this person, I enjoy talking to him at least. But, a really good listener is hard to come by. So let's get there. Maybe you ought to spread it out a little bit more. Let's don't just limit it to people right here. Of all the people you know, at church or at work or at home or in your family or anywhere that you might go, who is the very best listener of them all? Maybe it's your husband. I didn't hear he snickers. But most of us husbands get criticized pretty bad sometimes for not being good listeners. Larry probably does never, but, a lot of us do. Is it your husband? Is he a good listener? Or what about your wife? Is she the best listener you know? Ministers, a good minister is a good listener. It's one of the things that in the training you're really supposed to be trained to do. You really should have the feeling for listening. You should enjoy listening to people. You should want to listen to people. It kind of goes with the territory of being a minister. So maybe you would think that is true, but then on the other hand, after all, that's what he's supposed to be. It's kind of like going to see a psychologist. You can actually go call or get the telephone book out, look in the yellow pages, find a counselor, a psychologist perhaps, or a psychiatrist, and you can go and sit down and find a professional listener. Now we are dealing with someone who really is going to be good at what he does. He has been trained to do it. He has actually been taught to do it. He's been supervised in about 1,500 hours oftentimes of counseling sessions by another counselor to explain the areas where he's making mistakes, and he's trained to know the kind of questions he ought to ask. He's trained to have a certain amount of insight into what's going on in your mind and draw you out in the directions where you seem to want to talk and help you to understand what's going on inside of yourself. That's a good listener, isn't it? Yeah. But when you have to pay for it, somehow it's not the same. We wouldn't normally, even if we were seeing a psychologist, probably put him on our list of best listeners, because after all, he's paid for it. And maybe you wouldn't even put your minister there, because after all, that's his job. And we're really kind of now looking around for people that don't get paid for it, and it's not their job. They listen to you because of you, because they want to listen to you, because they're interested in you, because they care about you. What is a good listener? Well, naturally, it's somebody that looks at you, pays attention, kind of involves themselves in your conversation. But let me ask you this one. You're standing here talking to somebody, and you know that this person is an inveterate gossip. Now, the fact of the matter is, since you're a little inclined that way yourself, not bad, but just a little bit, the two of you have a rare old time talking together, and you just really give and take and laugh and joke and have a wonderful time together. And you say, that lady or that gentleman who does that is a good listener. Well, yes and no. Because the problem is, deep down in your heart, you realize that if they will gossip to you about someone else, they will gossip to someone else about you. If you don't consciously think about it, it's got to be somewhere down in your heart. And afterward, you say to yourself, oh, I hope she doesn't mention that. But you know she will. You know she will. And, of course, one of the problems with a gossip being a good listener is that you always have, if you're smart, if you think, if you're aware, you have this reserve. You can't really talk. You can't really express certain things. Maybe you do in the early occasions talking to such a person, but you have to learn pretty soon. I have to be careful what I say to this person. I think you have to be very careful about a gossip. Then there's the kind of person who listens too carefully. This is the person you're standing there talking to. I remember one fellow I used to know many years ago who wore rather thick glasses, and he had a very penetrating glance or stare. And when you talked to him, there was no doubt that he was listening to every word you said and that you would be held accountable for every word that you said. Now, I don't consider that a real good listener. That's not the kind of listener I look for when I want somebody I can sit down and relax and share my thoughts with. So, gossipy people, judgmental or judging people, don't make good listeners, even though they may be paying very close attention to what you say. One, so that he can judge you for what you say. The other one, so that he can use what you say. Now, there's also other kinds of people that you get involved with in conversations, and I remember another fellow that I knew. He was a fellow faculty member in Brickett Wood in the years that I was over there. It got so bad for me that I tried not to sit close to him in the faculty dining room because I call him the cross-examiner. It's like sitting next to Perry Mason when he wants to find something out that you've been, is going on inside of your mind. Every conversation was a cross-examination. Now, it can be very frustrating, of course, to try to talk to somebody and they just sit there and look at you. This guy didn't do that. He would ask questions, and we like the people who are listening to us ask questions and along. But in this case, they were boring in questions. They were blindsiding questions. They were inquisitive. It was just almost like a driving experience to try to carry on a conversation. I don't think that's a very good listener, the cross-examiner. Then, of course, there's the person who listens to be polite. You can always tell about those people. They have this kind of far-off expression in their face, and they bring themselves back every once in a while. And once in a while, instead of looking in your eyes, you realize that they're kind of looking over your shoulder, or that their eyes are focused on something about 10 feet behind you. But they're listening, and they're being polite, and they're nodding their head, and they're saying, uh-huh, and maybe uh-huh. And if you shake your head, they shake theirs. And, they sort of are with you. But there's a point in time where you realize the person is listening to be polite, and that's not very satisfying either. In fact, it's not much more satisfying than having to pay for it, for somebody to listen to you in a situation like that. And then there's the lip picker. Now, this is the person, I remember also in Brickett Wood, my boss over there, as a matter of fact, had this habit. He'd come into my office to talk to me. We had these new carpets all over the place that they'd been put in at that time. And when you have new carpets, you kind of, you tend to rake up little fuzzballs with your feet. Well, he came into my office one day, and I had something serious about a student problem or two. I wanted to talk to him. I was being a student at the time. And I was trying to explain this thing to him, and he said, excuse me, and he bent over and picked up a piece of this rolled up fuzz off my carpet and held it in his hand, went around and put it in my little wastebasket. And then he carried on, and I sort of stopped. He said, no, carry on. I just wanted to pick up these things. And I was supposed to talk to him while he's picking lint off of my carpet. Now, this is probably one of the most, now pardon me if I'm using illustrations in the other organization. I can't use them here. Somebody might get mad at me, But we all have our little peculiarities, but this is an extreme example of it. The other example, the one you encounter much more often, is the person who, when you're talking to him and trying to explain something, the conversation starts okay. The next thing you know, it's, picking the lint off here and there, or if the other person is sitting behind a desk, you may be rearranging things and putting things away, or shuffling his mail, or opening his mail and glancing to see it, sorting through the whole thing. We get very busy. Now, that's sort of the lint kicking type of listening that a lot of us do get used to, and we put up with it sometimes because that's what we've got. But the person who looks fidgeted, disturbed, looks out the window, or distracted. Then there's the person who listens to what you have to say, but for the life of you, you can't figure out whether they agree or disagree, understand what you're saying, or don't even have a clue. You would like to have at least what Dr. Spock would do, a raised eyebrow. You'd like to put one eyebrow up or tilt their head with an inquisitive look, but they just sort of listen. My dog is a better listener than a lot of people I know. Better listener. The only time she is not a good listener is when I try to explain the meaning of the days of unleavened dog biscuits. Because this is something to this day she does not understand. I try. I have her sit, and then I talk to her and I explain, now these are the days of unleavened dog biscuits, and you won't be getting any of your regular dog biscuits for the next 7 days. And as the conversation goes on, because she starts to groan, she rolls her eyes and looks for Allie to find out where she is. And why she's having to listen to all this. And after a little bit, she collapses on the floor and rolls over and puts her paws in the air. This doesn't work. But she is still a better listener than some people that you may come across from time to time. Then there are people who are pathological when it comes to listening. I don't mean to be rude, but we have a kind of a name in the vernacular for such people. It's motor mouth. It's the kind of person who, once they get started, almost never stop. It's the kind of, we have a little phone here in the office, kind of a phone system in your office. You can press the button and lay the phone in the cradle, and then you can hear what the person is saying. And it's really very useful if you're on hold, a lot of situations that you're in. But there is this one lady that calls once in a while, and she starts talking. We don't have anything to worry about. I mean, I'm not going to offend her. She won't be listening to this tape at all. She's not with us. She just calls every once in a while. And when you pick up the phone and says hello, she starts at the end of the last conversation she had with you. It may have been a month ago, but she will start, if necessary, in mid-sentence, and it seems like mid-sentence. In fact, I think she starts talking when she dials the telephone. And when you raise it up and start to say hello, she may already be talking before you get there. You can put the phone in the cradle, press the button, put the phone in the cradle, and listen to her. And then you can put her on hold for a while, and you can come back in 10 minutes, and she will still be talking. You can say something to her, and she doesn't even hear it. We instructed the ladies around here to hang up on her to save her phone bill. They did. She called right back. You hang up on her, she gets the dial tone. And finally began to realize that probably the safest thing to do for the ladies, whoever's responsible for the lady's phone bill, is to let her pick up a big one on the first call so he catches it quick. Otherwise, she may be calling for months. Somehow or other, I guess it's her husband or whoever has occasionally stopped that. Now that lady is ill. I mean, I don't want to make fun of her at all, because she has a very serious problem, and it's one of those things that happens. But there are all kinds of gradations. I'm sure that a lot of you ladies will know people that will call you, and you'll be talking to them from time to time. You almost hope that they will call you while you're ironing, because what you can do while you're ironing, you can lay the phone down at the end of the ironing table while she talks. You can keep right on ironing for a while here, and you can pick up the phone and say, and put it back down and carry on. And you can almost always never get caught at doing that sort of thing, right? I see a lot of knowing grins in this place. I don't mean I'm going to try to be equal in my use of my male and female pronouns and all of this, because I really don't want to blame women for this. Men can be as bad as women about what I'm talking about here. It really is a problem. You know exactly what they are like. I think they might be happy, some people who are in that condition, if they were talking to your answering machine. They might be content, because what they seem to want to do is to express what's on their mind. But you know what is funny? They don't want to talk to your answering machine. They want to talk to you. Even though it doesn't matter whether you hear it, it doesn't matter whether you respond to it, they just have got to talk to another human being. I don't know how people get to that point, but I wouldn't be a bit surprised if by being bad listeners along the way, most of us being bad listeners, that we create people with problems like that. If they go so long in their lives with nobody to listen to, and nobody to listen to them, no one to talk to who will understand, that finally they talk for talk's sake. And they give up on being understood, and they give up on interaction because they never get any. So it's rather strange to think about in that way. People who are like this don't need good listeners. They actually provide employment for poor listeners, is what it really boils down to. Now, why am I telling you all this? The reason I'm telling you all this is I get a lot of phone calls from time to time from depressed people. People who are struggling with life, and people who are ready to cash in their chips, people who are ready to give up on it, people who are ready to say, I don't care anymore, I don't care what happens. And not a few of these people I've had over the years have been contemplating suicide at the time I talk to them. Now, and when they get that far down the line, by the way, I think they always call at night. I do not believe I have ever talked in the daytime to a person who is contemplating suicide. It always seems to be at night. They are almost always alone. They are almost always depressed by their loneliness and discouraged by their loneliness. And what got me, and one that I had not long ago, I was talking with a lady who was very deeply discouraged, struggling with life, very lonely, and very depressed. And it seemed to me to be a good thing, since she knew where there was a church she could attend, to encourage her to go to church. I felt she needed the fellowship. I felt she needed to be around people and not be alone. You know what she told me? She said, I've gone to church. She said, but the problem I have when I go to church is that they don't understand. They all have children, and they want to talk about their children. They have jobs, and they want to talk about their jobs. And no one understands. And so, I think I talked to the lady for about an hour and a half to 2 hours before I was finished. And before we got through, we were both laughing together, and she felt a lot better. And, you know, here I am. I was basically doing what a person has to do. There's no particular credit to it, but the thing about it is, how many people did she go through before she found, if you want to call it that, a professional listener? Somebody who really would listen. I was sobered by it, and I thought, you know, it is a rare thing to encounter a person that is interested in you for what you are, that is interested in you for what you think, that is interested in you for how you feel, who wants to know how you feel, who wants to know what you do, who actually can share with you and give and take with you on the things that are important to you. You go visit family. I'm sure all of you have had that kind of experience. When you get a little bit out of touch with some parts of your family, and you do your sort of duty of going back around the Christmas season or around on Thanksgiving Day or something like that, and you sit down with these family members that you haven't been around in years. And you sit there and you listen to one of them talk about, well, I bought this car and I went down and I got an engine, you know, at the junkyard, and dropped that old engine out of that and put the new engine in it, and then I had a problem with the starter, so I had to drive 10 across town to get a starter for it and bring it back. Now, if you want a challenge in listening, there is a challenge to try to keep your eyes in focus. You know, while someone tells you all about things that you don't know anything really about and have less interest in, to be quite candid, but it is their life. You see, that is his life. That is what he lives for. Or to sit there and watch two relatives. One of them talks for a while about his rebuilding of an engine or putting a starter in his car he's got and so forth and so on. And then he stops to take a break, and the other one begins to talk about his life with absolutely no relationship at all to the life of the other person. I mean, there is no thread between the one part of the conversation and the other part of the conversation. Now, this happens to people all the time. This isn't rare. It doesn't just afflict your family or my family or someone else's family. It happens all the time. People's lives are so disengaged. And when the time comes to listen, there are no skills for it. There is no ability for it, it seems. There is no interest in it. There is no heart for it. Now, that's understandable, I guess, in a lot of parts of the world, is the tragedy when it hits a family. But it's a crying shame when it afflicts the church. Because in a church, in Christ's church, we are supposed to have a commitment at a higher level than that. We are supposed to overcome those inclinations to talk about ourselves, to simply be concerned about ourselves, to express ourselves and not ever listen to what anybody else has to say about their life or to express it. We're supposed to do better than that. And I'm concerned that in the process of time, some very desperate or very discouraged person could come to any one of us, and it might be one of us, and find no one to listen. All sorts of people to talk, but no one to listen. You know, I know there are a lot of suicide hotlines and crisis lines around the country where people talk. You know, I think those are a manifestation as much as anything else of people's desperate need to find somebody who will listen to them. Because many of the people who can command these lines are not trained psychologists or psychiatrists. They're not people who are in a position to really help or advise a person. They are taught to listen, to hear, to encourage, hopefully, along the way. But they can only do a little bit about it. But they are a manifestation of the need for listeners on the part of a very large portion of our population. And I think that the need is just as great in the church as it is in the world at large, and oftentimes it is almost as unmet in the church as it is in the world at large. It's a matter of concern. That's why I'm talking to you about it today. In saying this lady convicted us all. And I want you to turn back to a proverb that you read over quickly, and I'm afraid sometimes do not grasp, because the proverbs oftentimes are not put in a setting to where you will lead up to it, be hit with a point, and then be able to grasp it or have it explained to you. The point is made, and the writer sails on. It's just an epigram. It's just some words put in here, just a little proverb tossed right in a collection of proverbs, and you can lose it. Proverbs 18 and verse 2. A fool has no delight in understanding, but that his heart may discover itself. A fool has no delight in understanding, but that his heart may discover itself. There was a man once called me on the telephone. Been a long time now. He had a lot of troubles. He had a lot of difficulties with his wife. She'd been struggling with alcohol, which had been a very serious problem for him for a long time. And he called me one night, just as far down, I guess, as a man could go. And I was helpless. I really felt helpless that night. I didn't know what to suggest to him. I didn't know what to say to him, but listen to him talk. And when he would pause, I would think about what he was saying, and I would just say two words: I understand. I understand. I understand. I didn't really feel that I had done much for that man until he called me back about a year and a half later. And he said, "You'll never know what it meant to me that night when I called you and I unloaded on you." And he said, "I know all I did was talk and just jabber on and on and on. But those two words you said, I understand, changed my life." Now, you have experienced this, and I have done it, and you have done it, to where when a person is trying to explain something to us or trying to talk to us, when our turn comes, instead of trying to understand, we are ready to express ourselves. We want to engage in self-expression. And this is what a lot of conversations, if you stand by and listen to two people, just sort of the eavesdrop into the conversation, you'll be surprised how often you hear two people engaging in self-expression with practically no understanding locking up between the two people. What I'm appealing for today is for people who will say to themselves, wait a minute, let's not be too quick to express myself, what's on my heart, what's in my, not to discover what's in my heart. Let me discover what is in this man's heart. Let me discover what's in this woman's heart. Let me take delight in understanding, not merely that my heart may discover itself. So many things that we do that way. You know, among all the lusts that rage in the human breast, one of the most destructive is the lust for self-expression. Now, don't get me wrong. The desire for self-expression is good and it's healthy. Every human being that ever lived has had a desire to express himself to other people. That's why it's important that we be able to listen. It's because if no one will listen, no one is able to really express himself and be understood by another human being, and it's a powerful drive. But it can get out of control. It can get messed up like any other drive that a human being has. It can become lust. A lust for self-expression. I'll try to explain to you. It's not going to be easy, but I'll try to explain to you what I mean. If you look down a little further at chapter 18, verse 6. A fool's lips enter into contention, and his mouth calls for strokes. A fool's mouth is his destruction, and his lips are the snare of his soul. Well, you can get in a whole lot of trouble by flapping your mouth, by self-expression, by having to say things. It's a funny thing. You know, there are a lot of situations you're in, and you're about to speak, and you know you shouldn't say it, and you really don't want to say it, but something down inside you says, I've got to say it. You know, and you do. And a fool's lips. And the book of Proverbs is not really that gentle with you. It doesn't say that you're being foolish. It just, it says a fool's lips. It says a fool has no delight in understanding, but only in expressing his opinion or his heart discovering itself. It goes on to say the words of a talebearer are like wounds. They go down into the innermost parts of the belly. It's like putting a sword in and then turning the sword. Why do people do that? It is because of the lust to express what's on their mind when they know it shouldn't be said, when they ought to be listening, when they ought to be trying to understand and trying to grasp what it is another human being is trying to tell them. Not necessarily to give him advice. Oh, advice is cheap. Advice is really cheap. If you want to help somebody when they're trying to talk to you about a problem where they're kind of trying to ask you for advice, one of the best things in the world you could do is to ask, well, what do you feel you ought to do? You know, when consulting right down in your heart, what do you feel you ought to do? Because in many times what people are looking for as much as anything else is confirmation. If what they tell you they feel they ought to do is obviously wrong, then you have an obligation then to tell them that. See, you can then say, well, no, I don't think you should. Because here's what God's Word says. It says you shouldn't conduct yourself. You shouldn't do that. You shouldn't take that. You shouldn't say that to that person. But the problem with a person who is in this condition who has a lust for self-expression is that lust overpowers all self-control, and he's got to say what's on his mind. I don't care what else happens. Chapter 17, verse 9. He that covers a transgression seeks love. Oh, it's a beautiful concept, isn't it? Somebody has sinned. Somebody has made a mistake. We found out about it, and we cover it up. Cover up got to be a real nasty word back during the Watergate period, but you know it's not. It's not a nasty word at all. Now, a government must not. A government has an obligation to pursue and to vindicate and to administer justice. But as human beings, as individual Christians in particular, he says, he that covers a transgression seeks love. Now, this is the statement of good. But he that repeats the matter separates very friends. Now, it's a funny thing again. Here a person has done this thing, and you know he has done it. You're aware of it. He's aware you know it, and you've talked to him about it. And you know that you should not say a word about it. You know the Bible says he that covers a transgression seeks love. But you know what else you know? You know that there will burn inside of you a desire to express that to some other person. You will have a feeling that you want to tell somebody. You'll be in a conversation, and it will serve to illustrate a point you want to make. And it will almost kill you not to tell somebody. Especially your closest friends. Especially the people with whom you are intimate. The people that you feel would never tell anybody else because they promised you. But you see, that lust for self-expression will overpower the desire for proper and right self-expression. It will overcome all the reticence. It will overcome all of the control that God's Word has put into you. This is what we're talking about when we say a fool does not delight in understanding, but only that his heart may discover itself. Whatever's down in here, we'll open it up. It's kind of like being a spiritual flasher in a way. You've got to let people see what's deep down inside of your being and inside of your heart. Chapter 15 has another illustration, verse 28. Actually, verse 27. An ungodly man digs up evil, and his lips there is a burning fire. And that's an interesting expression. It is like a fire. It's like something that you've got to do something about. It burns, and it burns. You see, the only way you get relief is to talk about it. A perverse man sows strife, and a whisperer separates chief friends. Oh, it is so sad. All the years now that I've been in the ministry, and since I've been in the ministry, I've had more occasion to be aware of it and to see it than I did, let's say, as a non-minister. But to go and recount and to list and to itemize the occasions that I have known about, where people who had been bosom buddies, people who had loved each other and would have done anything for each other, have slowly but surely been poisoned toward each other by third parties who just could not control the lust for self-expression, the lust that their heart would discover itself, that whatever's going on in here and burning has got to be gotten out. The harm, the hurt. And the book says a brother offended is harder to be won than a strong city. And I really don't know. Maybe occasionally people are able to fight their way back from that type of thing. But most of the time, they never do. Most of the time, they never do. And you know what makes it tough? Oh, your vanity makes it tough, I guess, in a way to go to that plan that maybe you have offended. Actually, you didn't mean to offend it. You said something to a third party who repeated it to it. And that's where the offense comes. One of the reasons it's tough, though, to go back and talk to a person where that offense exists? It's because you're afraid he won't listen. It's because you're afraid she won't hear what you have to say. It won't give you a fair hearing. You're afraid you will be rejected out of hand without them even considering any of the problems that may exist in it. Do you ever think about the fact that might be the reason somebody hasn't come to you to straighten out a difficulty that exists between you? It's because they are afraid that if they do come to you, you won't listen. They're afraid you won't respond. As a minister, it often falls our obligation when somebody comes to us to complain about something someone else has done to say, well, have you followed Matthew 18 and gone to your brother? Well, no, but he wouldn't listen if I do. Most common answer. He wouldn't listen if I went. You may be right. The chances are you are, but it still doesn't relieve you from the obligation of going. Because I think sometimes when we go, and we go in a right spirit, and the person won't listen, and we go away feeling we have failed, we may have sown the initial seed toward ultimately straightening the situation out. Because we have done our part, we've opened the door to a reconciliation in a situation like that. Chapter 16. We'll get these in the best order, but here they are anyway. Chapter 16, verse... no, I've already used that one. Chapter 15, verse 1. A soft answer turns away wrath. Grievous words stir up anger. The tongue of the wise uses knowledge rightly, but the mouth of fools pours out foolishness. Now remember, the fool is the man who does not take delight in understanding, but only that his heart may discover itself, that he can express what's on his mind. They just pour it out. The Hebrew word is belch. It's a pretty good word for what goes on sometimes when people belch out things all over people that they don't even have any reason to know, and thereby separate friends. You know, that is one of the things that God reserves special anger for, is he that sows discord among brethren. He also has some very special things to say about people who work toward healing between brethren. Now, apart from the destruction that we reap among ourselves by our desires for self-expression, our inordinate desire for self-expression, the lust for self-expression can actually destroy a church. I mean, a local church. It can tear a church from one end to the other because of the people's desire to open up their mouth and spit out information, to belch information about other people in the congregation. It can sow discord. It can actually begin to create problems where there can be a rupture in a church. It is also, unfortunately, what drives many men and women to preach. The lust for self-expression. Now, I want you to know that. I don't mean to be harsh about it. I don't mean to embarrass anybody about it, but I think we need to realize that. That oftentimes people who fight and struggle to have a chance to be in a ministry, or especially a preaching ministry, sometimes it is because they are people who delight in understanding. But sometimes it is because they have a lust for self-expression. And, of course, I'm afraid in the process of doing so, they identify themselves as fools. The lust for self-expression can show up in a determination to preach what you think is right, regardless of what anyone else thinks is right. You know, I can speak from personal experience in this regard as a minister. The things that go on in my mind from time to time. I come across some scripture. I come across a concept. I come across an idea, a way of presenting a new subject, a way of getting a new idea across. And I could get into a frame of mind of saying, well, God has revealed this to me, and I must preach it. And therefore I go out with this desire to preach this new thing. You know, I could easily be lust. A lust for self-expression. A lust for having something new. A lust for having people look at me and say, my, what a wonderful revealer of new truth. Could easily be that way, couldn't it? Now, on the other hand, if I had even a sense of courtesy toward my fellow ministers, I might very well, be very glad to sit down and test it out. Apart from courtesy to them, there's also this ingrained fear of being blindsided. It's a good idea to expose your idea to people who can criticize it and cut it down and maybe show you where you might not be wrong before you start preaching it at the top of your lungs to other people. But it's fascinating over time. The worldwide Church of God basically solved this problem, or sort of solved it, by just shutting everybody up, by sticking a muzzle on everybody, not allowing any kind of self-expression really at all in many ways. But there is a problem that can exist in a free society, and the Church of God International is a free society. And every one of us has got to accept a responsibility for it, not to allow ourselves to go off half-cocked. There are all preachers in the world, whether they be ordained or self-appointed, whether they be soapbox preachers on a corner, no matter what their particular rank or status, all preachers fall into two categories. Those who delight in understanding and those who delight in expressing themselves. And Solomon says, a fool takes no delight in understanding, but only in expressing himself, so that his heart may discover itself. I want you to turn back to Ecclesiastes, the 5th chapter, to I think an important scripture in this regard. Ecclesiastes chapter 5. Verse 1. Watch your step when you go to the house of God, and be more ready to hear than to give the sacrifice of fools. What an expression. The sacrifice of fools. The image I have is of one who comes up to the altar of God with a lamb, an offering, a couple of turtle doves, and the priest is there, and he takes their sacrifice before God, and he offers it, and it's accepted, and he goes away to his house. And so this is the image that we get. Now, Solomon here presents us and says, now watch your step when you go up there. and be more ready to hear. Now, the image then probably is more of one who goes up to the temple to pray, which was where people went to pray. They would go there because that was the place where God's name was. It was the place where God's presence was. It was where he had said, I will have my eyes toward this place, and if you will come and pray in this place, then I will hear your prayer, and so on. So people went to the temple to pray. He said, come in here then, and be more ready to hear than to lay upon God's altar these pages and pages and pages and pages of words. The sacrifice, he says, of fools is words poured out before God, apart from what we do where men are concerned. He said, they consider not that they do evil. Be not rash with your mouth. Don't let your heart be hasty to utter anything before God. Don't get in a hurry. Yeah, it's funny about prayer, and you do have to learn sometimes. One man said that most people spend their whole lives praying the equivalent of, oh Lord, please let 2 and 2, 2 plus 2 equal 5. Spend their whole lives praying in that vein, asking God to make something so that just isn't so and never will be so. But we go to prayer and we ask God to punish our enemies. We ask God sometimes repeatedly to change somebody's mind or somebody's heart. We ask God to give us this job, or we ask God to stop this person who's trying to cause us trouble. We ask God for all kinds of things, and sometimes we do so very hastily. He says when you go before God, be more ready to hear than to give the sacrifice of fools. Now, what do you suppose that means? Well, I don't know that I can tell you altogether, because I don't think that very many of us will ever in our lifetimes, if any, experience God actually, his voice, falling on our eardrums at all. But I do believe that God does speak to us. I believe that he speaks to us in a still, small voice. I think he speaks to us in the privacy of prayer. I think he speaks to us on our bed at night. I think he speaks to us in the words that he has here from the Bible. I kind of visualize what he's trying to tell us is when you get ready to pray, go to your private place, and don't be in a hurry to say anything. You can take your Bible with you if you want, and you can open that Bible before you on a little stool or a chair. Now, they wouldn't obviously have been doing that in the temple, because in those days they didn't have Bibles as they could carry around in their pocket like you and I do. But for you, it would be take your Bible, go to a private place, and spend a few moments being quiet. And before you ask God to smite your enemy hip and thigh, David did that, of course, but you can see some interesting things happening in David's prayers as he prays some of those things. Before you ask God to smite your enemy hip and thigh, give some thought to what that means, what its implications will be for him, what its implications will be for you, how it might change your life for the good, how it might change your life for the worse. Think about the things you're going to ask God and listen. Listen to what he might tell you. Listen to what you might find in the Scriptures. Listen to it's funny sometimes. God can speak to you in very, very subtle ways. And I want you also to know something else about those times when God speaks to you. When he decides to speak to you, it is for you and you alone. God is not going to speak to you in the corner of your prayer closet some night and tell you to go tell somebody else what to do with his life. And that other person, he can speak to the other person just as easy as he can speak to you. And if he won't listen to God, he's not going to listen to you either. So don't worry about those things. But what you want to be listening for is what God has to say about you, and how you live your life, and how you act toward other people, and how you change yourself, and how you actually pull yourself up short in order to get certain things in your life right. How God tells you where you're right and how he tells you where you're wrong. I know sometimes get to where we feel that's all God tells us is where we're wrong. That's maybe because we're wrong so much, but on the other hand, I think we may also find that there are times when God gives us enormous encouragement. It struck me one day like a sledgehammer when I suddenly noticed that scripture back when it talked about Israel having walked out of Egypt for 40 years, that their shoes never got old. One day they woke up and realized their sandals were not wearing out. It's a miracle and an incredible encouragement, and in one of the most obscure, unnoticed, unglorified, unimpressive ways you could ever notice. I'll tell you what that means to me. It means that God will never, ever leave you without encouragement, without helping you understand that he's with you, without maybe giving you a pat on the back for the things that you have done that are right. When you go to the house of God, be more ready to hear than to give the sacrifice of fools. Be not rash with your mouth. Let not your heart be hasty to utter anything before God. For God is in heaven, and you are upon earth. Therefore, let your words be few. You know, you really don't have to babble on to God for an hour in order to have prayed. You know, really, you just don't. Now, you may spend an hour with God. You may spend a half hour, 45 minutes, 15 minutes. I don't know. You may spend a lot of time with God. But, you know, you don't have to pray or talk all the time. That's what it says, isn't it? Don't be rash with your mouth. Let your words be few. For a dream comes by a multitude of business. Now, you've had a very busy day. You know, one thing is your business coming on top of another, and you go to bed and you dream about it all night long, right? A dream is there because you've got too much going on in your life, maybe. And a fool's voice is known by a multitude of words. Think about that, you know, how does God feel about me if I'm a motor mouth before God? Well, he says a fool's voice is known by a multitude of words. You and I will recognize it, and here's the sobering news. God also will recognize it. Now, when you vow a vow, don't defer to pay it. God has no pleasure in fools. So if you want to know how God feels about this thing of babbling on, there it is. He has no pleasure in fools. If you promise God something, pay it. Better is it that you should not promise. You don't have to. Then you should promise and not pay. Suffer not your mouth to cause your flesh to sin. Neither say you before the angel. And that's kind of scary. That one right there is that there might be an angel coming down here and say, hey, you vowed, I've come to correct. Don't say to that angel, don't say to him, it was an error. It was a mistake. Oops. You know, I didn't mean that. Lest he be angry and destroy the work of your hands. For in the multitude of dreams and many words, there are also divers vanities. You fear God is the warning. You know, something struck me not long ago, and I asked this question about who is the greatest listener you know. The fact is that the greatest listener that you know is God. Of all that might be, it's God. And he is the best listener in the universe. All of his own proverbs about listening, he follows. He is swift to hear and slow to speak. You know, I got thinking about this, and it's one of the things that really struck me. In the Library of Congress, I don't know how many millions of volumes of books there are, and that is just one of the great libraries of the world. You go to the British Museum, and you're going to find millions more. And you go to some of the museums in other countries, and the books published, millions more. Must have been billions upon billions of books that published in this world. By this time, I wouldn't have any idea how to express how many. But in 6,000 years of communicating with man, of all the time that God could be speaking to man and saying things to man and expressing things to man, everything it is there. One book. And in fact, a lot of the book is history. A lot of the book is just simply explaining our stupidity, not what God told us to do. And you could actually take everything that God has said to man in 6,000 years and print it in a little book and tuck it in your pocket. And nobody would even realize that it's there. Every word is precious. Every word. Man shall not live by bread alone, we're told, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God. It really makes you realize that if God, of all the things he could have said, if he said something that is right here in this book, then this must be very important because he is a person of few words. Very few words. I think it's a fascinating thing to realize that God doesn't talk very much. Not to us, not to anybody. But when he does, you need to listen. He is the greatest listener of all time, of course. But he is patient. He is interested. He doesn't interrupt you. Isn't that nice? I mean, you can go talk to God and never get interrupted. How many people can you do that with? He loves you. He cares about your feelings. Wants to know how you feel about it. Wants to know what you're afraid of. Wants to know how he can help you get through it. Wants to know what you think is the solution to the problem. God is very patient with you. He wants to help, and he doesn't want to hurt you at all. I read somewhere recently that, and this was by a Protestant theologian, he said, you know, of all the gifts that God gives, forgiveness of sin, promise of heaven is his idea, And he went on a number of things that God gives to mankind. He said the greatest gift that God gives to mankind is himself. He actually gives himself to you. He actually positions himself and positions you so that any time you want to do so, you can talk to him and he will listen. Is that worth anything? The fellowship. This is fellowship. This is fellowship with God. And John is at pains to tell all those of us who are concerned about fellowship with one another. He said, oh yeah, that's fine. He said, but our fellowship is with God and with his Son, Jesus Christ. And we have fellowship with one another through them. That fellowship can exist no matter if the rest of us fail completely along the way. Best of everything that God gives us, he understands. If it's something you didn't want him to understand, you're out of luck. He is going to understand it. But what you generally are looking for is someone who really will understand you and your feelings, what you want, what you need. And it's there for you at any moment of time. And here comes the kicker. We are supposed to be like him. We are going to be ultimately very like him. Even now, though, we are supposed to have his spirit, his mind, his ways. And we should be striving to be like him. Here in the church, there are a number of ministries. Paul speaks of many ministries. But right now, probably the most wide open field where there is the greatest need and perhaps the greatest appreciation and the most to be accomplished is the ministry of listening. And the field is wide open.